The metal felt heavy in Commander Zek-Thoris's four hands. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed with thousands of Valerian citizens, all watching him receive the highest honor their republic could give. Purple banners hung from the crystal ceiling, and the air smelled of victory flowers. Everyone was celebrating the end of the Third Galactic War. Zek-Thoris stood 8 feet tall on the golden platform. His purple skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his 4 crystalline eyes reflected the cheering crowd. The medals on his chest told the story of his military career: 23 battles, 15 victories, 8 decorations for bravery. Today's medal was different. Today's medal was for defeating the humans. "Citizens of Valeria," announced High Commander Velnara, her silver claws clicking against the microphone. "We honor Commander Zek-Thoris for his brilliant victory at Kepler Station. His tactical genius crushed the human resistance and brought peace to our galaxy." The crowd roared. Zek-Thoris tried to smile, but his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere darker. Somewhere filled with memories he wished he could forget. Before the war, the briefings had made it sound easy. Humans were young, the intelligence, officer said. They had only been traveling between stars for 200 years. Other species had been doing it for thousands. Humans were emotional and disorganized. They would break quickly under pressure. The first reports called them primitive savages. Their technology was basic. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were simple. The Valerian military expected to crush them in a few months. Zek-Thoris remembered, laughing at those briefings. How hard could it be to defeat a species that had barely left their home planet? The ceremony continued around him, but his thoughts drifted to Titan's Rest. That mining world had been his first real taste of human warfare. His battalion of elite shock troops had landed expecting easy victory. The humans had only a small garrison there, maybe 50 soldiers protecting some mining equipment and a few thousand civilians. It should have been over in hours. Instead, it became a 3-day nightmare. Staff Sergeant Katie Morrison commanded the Human Defenders. She was small compared to Zek-Thoris, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with short brown hair and green eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. Scars crossed her face from previous battles. When Zek-Thoris first saw her through his battlescope, he had wondered how such a tiny creature could lead soldiers into combat. He learned quickly. Morrison's squad included some of the most dangerous humans Zek-Thoris had ever faced. Corporal Jake Sullivan was their demolitions expert. The man could turn anything into a bomb. He rigged the mining tunnels with so many explosives that Zek-Thoris's troops were afraid to move through them. Every step might trigger a blast that would bring down tons of rock. Private Amy Rodriguez was their sniper. She picked off Valerian officers from impossible distances, using an old-fashioned projectile rifle instead of energy weapons. Rodriguez could put a bullet through a target's eye from over a mile away. She killed 12 of Zek-Thoris's best soldiers before anyone even saw her. But what really shocked Zek-Thoris was how they fought together. Most species, when facing overwhelming odds, would try to negotiate or surrender. These humans did neither. They fought like cornered animals, but with the intelligence of advanced beings. Morrison turned the entire mining complex into a fortress. She used the industrial equipment as weapons, dropping ore containers on advancing Valerian troops. Sullivan filled the tunnels with smoke and explosives, making every corridor a death trap. Rodriguez covered the approaches, her rifle cracking, like thunder across the mining fields. For 3 days, 50 humans held off 3,000 Valerians. The applause in the Grand Assembly Hall brought Zek-Thoris back to the present. High Commander Velnara was talking about his tactical brilliance, his strategic mind, his ability to adapt to unexpected situations. If only she knew the truth. There had been no brilliant tactics at Titan's Rest. Zek-Thoris had simply thrown bodies at the problem until the humans ran out of ammunition. Even then, they had not surrendered. He remembered the final assault. His troops had finally broken through the outer defenses. They cornered Morrison and her remaining soldiers in the main mining shaft. Zek-Thoris had offered them surrender terms, unusual for Valerian military doctrine, but he had developed a strange respect for these fierce little creatures. Morrison had looked at him with those burning green eyes. She was wounded, bleeding from shrapnel cuts across her arms and face. Half her squad was dead. They had no ammunition left, no explosives, no way to escape. She smiled. "Thanks for the offer," Morrison said through the translation device. "But we're not done yet." That was when Zekthorus learned about human stubbornness. Morrison triggered the final demolition charges, bringing down the entire mining complex. The explosion killed her and her remaining soldiers, but it also destroyed the mine's main processing facility and gave the civilian population time to evacuate to the transport ships. She had died smiling, taking victory from the jaws of defeat. The crowd was cheering again. Someone was giving a speech about Valerian superiority and the natural order of the galaxy. Zekthorus wondered what they would think if they knew the truth about the war. The humans had never won a major battle. Their technology was inferior. Their numbers were smaller. Their ships were slower and their weapons were weaker. By every measure that mattered, the Valerians should have won easily. But the humans had made them pay for every victory. They fought in ways that defied military logic. They refused to surrender even when facing certain death. They turned defeats into moral victories and made their enemies question the point of winning. Zekthorus thought about Captain Ryan Foster, who had rammed his destroyed ship into a Valerian battlecruiser rather than let it escape. Or Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Park, who had spent 2 years running guerrilla operations behind enemy lines, saving thousands of civilians. Or Commander Steve Walsh, who had led his troops in singing an ancient Earth song as they made their last stand at Luna Base. These humans had taught Zekthorus something that no military academy could teach. They had shown him what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. They fought not just for victory, but for the idea that some things were worth dying for. The ceremony was ending. High Commander Velnara placed the final medal on Zekthorus's chest. The crowd stood and applauded. Victory music played from hidden speakers. Everyone was happy. Everyone except the hero of the hour. Zekthorus looked out at the celebrating crowd and wondered if any of them understood what they had really won. The war was over, but the cost had been enormous. More than that, the humans had changed something fundamental about how Zekthorus saw warfare, honor, and what it meant to be a soldier. As he walked off the platform, the weight of the medals felt heavier than ever. They were supposed to represent glory and victory. Instead, they felt like reminders of every human who had died fighting for their beliefs. The ceremony was over, but Zekthorus knew that his real battle was just beginning. The battle to understand what he had learned from his enemies and what it meant for the rest of his life. 3 months after the victory ceremony, Zekthorus sat in the High Council chambers on Valerian Prime. The room was carved from a single piece of black crystal, with seats arranged in a perfect circle. 12 of the most powerful Valerians in the galaxy met here to decide the fate of conquered worlds. Today they were discussing the human surrender terms. Council leader Velnara spread her silver claws across the holographic display. Numbers glowed in the air between them: casualty reports, resource costs, fleet losses. The data told a story that made every council member uncomfortable. "Explain this to me, Commander," Velnara said, her voice sharp with anger. "We lost 40% of our military forces defeating a species that had been traveling between stars for less than 2 centuries. How is this possible?" Zekthorus stared at the numbers floating in the air. Each digit represented thousands of Valerian soldiers who would never return home. Ships that had been destroyed. Resources that had been consumed. The war had cost more than anyone had expected. "The humans fought differently than we anticipated," he said carefully. "Differently?" Council member Thexelar leaned forward, his 4 eyes narrowing. "They lost every major battle. Their fleet was destroyed. Their worlds were occupied. How does a defeated enemy cause such losses?" Zekthorus closed his eyes and remembered Captain Ryan Foster. The human naval officer had commanded a destroyer called the UES Liberty during the siege of Mars. Foster's ship was old and outgunned, running on emergency power and held together with spare parts. The Liberty should have been destroyed in the first minutes of battle. Instead, Foster had kept it fighting for 6 hours. He used the ship's smaller size to dart between Valerian battleships, striking at weak points and then disappearing into the asteroid field around Mars. When the Liberty finally took a hit that cracked its hull, Foster could have surrendered. His crew was dying, his weapons were failing, and his engines were about to explode. Instead, he did something that still gave Zekthorus nightmares. Foster rammed his ship into the Valerian flagship. The collision destroyed both vessels instantly. Foster and his crew of 200 humans died in the explosion, but they also killed Admiral Kethmore and his entire command staff. The loss of the flagship threw the Valerian fleet into chaos and allowed the human defenders to hold Mars for 3 more weeks. They were unpredictable, Zekthorus told the Council. They used tactics that made no strategic sense. Suicide attacks are not tactics, Velnara said coldly. They are desperation. Zekthorus thought about Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Park. The Igur human officer had spent 2 years running guerrilla operations on occupied worlds. Park and her team moved like ghosts, appearing without warning to strike at Valerian supply lines and communication centers. What made Park so dangerous was not her military skill, though she was an excellent soldier. What made her dangerous was her ability to inspire others. Everywhere she went, human civilians joined her cause. Factory workers sabotaged production lines. Farmers hid resistance fighters in their fields. Children carried messages between rebel cells. Park's forces specialized in rescue operations. They would appear from nowhere to extract trapped civilians or wounded soldiers, then vanish before reinforcements could arrive. She personally saved over 3,000 non-combatants during the war. The Valerians had called her the Ghost of Proxima because she seemed to be everywhere at once. Entire divisions had been paralyzed by fear of her attacks. Soldiers would jump at shadows, afraid that Park and her team were watching from the darkness. The humans created networks of resistance, Zekthorus explained. Even after we occupied their worlds, they continued fighting. Terrorism, Council member Yordak said dismissively. Criminal activity, not real warfare. The words made Zekthorus angry, though he tried not to show it. He remembered Commander Steve Walsh and the defense of Luna Base. Walsh had commanded the Moon's defensive forces during the final assault on Earth's solar system. Luna Base was humanity's last stronghold. The orbital weapons platforms had been destroyed. The fleet was scattered. Earth itself was under bombardment. Walsh and his defenders knew they were going to die. When the base's shields finally failed and Valerian troops breached the outer hull, Walsh had gathered his remaining soldiers in the central command center. Zekthorus had led the assault team through the twisted corridors, expecting to find panic and chaos. Instead, he found something that haunted him still. Walsh and 43 humans were singing together, an old Earth song called Amazing Grace that spoke of hope and redemption. Their voices echoed through the damaged corridors as Valerian soldiers advanced toward their position. They died fighting, still singing, still defiant. Walsh had looked directly at Zekthorus as he fell, and there had been no fear in his eyes, only sadness for what the war had cost both sides. They fought for ideals, Zekthorus said quietly. Not just for victory. Velnara's claws clicked against the crystal table. Ideals do not win wars, Commander. Resources win wars. Technology wins wars. Numbers win wars. Then why did we lose so many soldiers? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all seen the casualty reports. They knew the cost of victory. Because humans are insane, Thexelar said finally. They fight without logic. They throw away their lives for meaningless gestures. Zekthorus thought about Dr. Megan Torres, a human scientist who had been captured during the battle for Europa. The Valerians had expected her to provide information about human military technology. Instead, they discovered she had been working on something unexpected. Torres had spent 2 years developing a neural disruptor that would incapacitate Valerian soldiers without killing them. The weapon would shut down their nervous systems temporarily, leaving them unconscious but unharmed. It was a more complex and expensive solution than conventional weapons. The human military command had rejected the project. They said it was too costly and difficult to manufacture. They preferred to use standard weapons that could kill Valerian soldiers quickly and efficiently. Torres had been furious about the decision. She had wanted to find a way to win the war without unnecessary death. Even while facing conquest, she had been trying to minimize casualties on both sides. They studied our biology, Zecthorus told the council, not to create better weapons, but to find ways to fight without killing. Nonsense, Yordak said. Humans are violent primitives. They killed plenty of our soldiers. They could have killed more. The statement shocked the council into silence. Zecthorus realized he had said too much, but it was too late to take the words back. What do you mean? Velnara asked slowly. They chose to fight a harder war rather than develop easier ways to kill us. Their scientists wanted to create non-lethal weapons, but their military chose conventional arms instead. They could have used biological weapons against us, but they didn't. They could have targeted civilian populations, but they focused on military installations. The council members looked at each other with confusion and growing unease. This was not the story they wanted to hear about their defeated enemies. You sound like you admire them, Thexlar said accusingly. Zecthorus met his gaze steadily. I respect worthy opponents. They were not worthy, Velnara said firmly. They were defeated. The war is over. We won. Yes, Zecthorus agreed. We won. But as the council meeting continued and the members discussed surrender terms and occupation policies, Zecthorus found himself wondering what victory really meant. The humans had lost their war, but they had also taught their conquerors something important about the cost of fighting. The ghosts of human soldiers would follow him forever, not because they had been his enemies, but because they had shown him what it meant to fight with honor even in defeat. 6 months after Earth's surrender, a human diplomatic ship arrived at Valerian Prime. The vessel was small and scarred from battle, its hull patched with different metals. It looked like something that had been rebuilt many times, held together by determination and spare parts. Zecthorus waited at the spaceport landing pad, dreading his new assignment. The High Council had appointed him as military liaison to the human delegation. It was supposed to be an honor, a reward for his service during the war. To Zecthorus, it felt like punishment. The ship's airlock opened with a soft hiss. 4 humans stepped onto the platform, and Zecthorus was surprised by what he saw. He had expected broken people, defeated representatives of a conquered species. Instead, the humans walked with quiet dignity, their heads held high. Ambassador Helen Cruz led the delegation. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple style. Her brown eyes were calm and intelligent, taking in everything around her with careful attention. She wore a dark blue diplomatic uniform that was neat, but showed signs of wear. Commander Zecthorus, she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. Thank you for meeting us. I'm Ambassador Cruz. Zecthorus hesitated before taking her small hand in one of his 4 larger ones. Her grip was firm and steady. She looked directly into his crystalline eyes without fear or hatred. This confused him more than anything else could have. Ambassador, he replied through his translator. Welcome to Valerian Prime. The other delegation members introduced themselves. Major Colin Brooks was Cruz's military aide, a veteran of the asteroid belt campaigns. He had fought in some of the war's bloodiest battles, and it showed. Brooks walked with a slight limp from wounds sustained at the Battle of Ceres. His left arm hung stiffly at his side, damaged by Valerian plasma fire. Dr. Megan Torres was the delegation's scientific advisor. She was the same scientist Zecthorus remembered from the intelligence reports, the one who had tried to develop non-lethal weapons. Torres was younger than the others, with bright eyes that seemed fascinated by everything around her. Captain Frank Kim had served as a fighter pilot until his ship was shot down over Europa. He had spent 8 months in Valerian detention camps before being released in a prisoner exchange. Kim was quiet and watchful, but showed no signs of the hatred Zecthorus expected from a former prisoner. As they traveled to the diplomatic quarter, Zecthorus found himself studying the humans. They spoke quietly among themselves, pointing out architectural features and discussing the alien landscape. Dr. Torres asked questions about Valerian technology and culture with genuine curiosity. This was not what he had expected from a defeated enemy. The negotiations took place in a neutral conference room deep within the government complex. The humans presented their proposals for reconstruction aid, refugee resettlement, and trade agreements. They were professional and well-prepared, treating the discussions like business meetings rather than surrender negotiations. What bothered Zekthorus most was their complete lack of resentment. These people had every reason to hate him. His forces had killed their friends, occupied their worlds, and bombed their cities. Yet they treated him with the same courtesy they would show any diplomatic partner. During a break in the negotiations, Ambassador Cruz approached him privately. "You look troubled, Commander," she said. "Is there something we can clarify about our proposals?" Zekthorus struggled to find the right words. "I do not understand your attitude, Ambassador. We are your conquerors. Why do you show no anger?" Cruz was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Anger is a luxury we can't afford right now," she said finally. "Our people need food, medicine, and safe places to live. Hatred won't provide those things. But we destroyed your worlds. We killed your soldiers." "Yes, you did. And we killed yours. That's what happens in war." Cruz looked out the window at the alien city beyond. "The question now is what happens after the war. We can choose to build something better, or we can let anger destroy what's left." That evening, the delegation joined Zekthorus for dinner in the diplomatic quarters. The conversation was surprisingly comfortable, focusing on cultural differences and shared experiences rather than the recent conflict. Major Brooks told stories about his service in the asteroid belt, describing the beauty of Jupiter's moons and the challenges of fighting in zero gravity. He spoke with professional respect about Valerian tactical abilities, analyzing battles they had fought against each other with the detachment of military historians. Dr. Torres was fascinated by Valerian scientific achievements. She asked detailed questions about their crystal technology and energy systems. When Zekthorus mentioned the Neural Disruptor project, she became visibly excited. "You knew about that?" she asked. "I spent 2 years developing that system. The military command said it was too expensive to produce." "Why did you want to create non-lethal weapons?" Zekthorus asked. "It would have been easier to develop more effective ways to kill us." Torres looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because you're people too," she said simply. "You have families, dreams, hopes for the future. Why would I want to take that away if there was another choice?" Captain Kim was the quietest of the group, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He described his time in Valerian prison camps without bitterness, focusing instead on the kindness shown by some of his guards. "There was a young Valerian soldier named Kexton," Kim said. "He used to sneak extra food to the human prisoners. One day his supervisor caught him and had him disciplined. I never saw him again, but I hope he's okay." The stories continued through the evening. Each human spoke of Valerian soldiers who had shown mercy or kindness during the war. They remembered acts of compassion from their enemies with the same clarity they remembered acts of violence. Zekthorus found himself sharing his own memories of human courage and determination. He told them about Katie Morrison and her defense of Titan's Rest, about Ryan Foster's sacrifice at Mars, about Steve Walsh and his singing soldiers at Luna Base. The humans listened with respect, nodding at familiar names and adding their own details to the stories. They spoke of these fallen soldiers with pride, but also with sadness for the waste of war. "You know," Ambassador Cruz said quietly, "the hardest part of war isn't fighting the enemy. It's living with what you learned about yourself in the process." Her words hit Zekthorus like a physical blow. She understood exactly what he had been feeling since the war ended. The weight of victory, the burden of survival, the knowledge that war changed everyone it touched. "How do you carry that burden?" he asked. "By choosing to build instead of destroy," she replied. "By deciding that the future can be better than the past." Dr. Torres leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibility. "We could work together now," she said. "Combine human determination with Valerian technology. Imagine what we could accomplish." "Your people might not accept that," Zekthorus warned. Many Valerians still see humans as primitive and dangerous. And many humans see Valerians as brutal conquerors, Major Brooks added. But that doesn't mean we can't change their minds. Captain Kim spoke up for the first time in an hour. In the prison camp, I learned something important. People are people, no matter what species they are. We all want the same basic things: safety for our families, purpose in our lives, hope for the future. The evening ended with plans for cultural exchange programs and joint scientific projects. The humans proposed student exchanges, shared research initiatives, and cooperative exploration missions. They wanted to turn their former enemies into partners. As Zekthorus walked back to his quarters, he thought about what the humans had taught him. They had shown him that strength came in many forms. Physical courage was important, but moral courage was more important still. These humans had lost everything in the war, but they refused to lose their humanity. They chose forgiveness over revenge, cooperation over conflict, hope over despair. The first time since the war ended, Zekthorus began to believe that victory might actually mean something worthwhile. 1 year after the war ended, Zekthorus stood in the office of Fleet Admiral Korthvel, holding a transfer request in his 4 hands. The Admiral's office overlooked the capital city of Valerian Prime, with its crystal spires reaching toward the purple sky. The Frontier Patrol? Admiral Korthvel looked confused. Commander, that's exile duty. Why would you want to leave the capital? Zekthorus stared out the window at the celebrating crowds below. Victory parades were still common, and Valerian citizens still cheered when they saw war heroes. The sight made him feel empty inside. I need a change of assignment, sir, he said simply. The Admiral signed the transfer papers with obvious reluctance. This is a waste of talent, Commander. You could have any posting in the fleet. High Command, Strategic Planning, Training Division. Instead, you choose to patrol empty space on the galaxy's edge. Thank you, sir. 3 weeks later, Zekthorus reported to the patrol vessel Vigilant Dawn at the remote Kepler station. The ship was smaller than he was used to, designed for long-range missions in unexplored space. His new crew was a mix of young officers looking for adventure and older veterans who preferred quiet duty away from the political games of the capital. Captain Mexstar welcomed him aboard with typical Valerian efficiency. Good to have you, Commander. Your reputation precedes you. What brings a war hero to the Frontier Patrol? I wanted to see what we won, Zekthorus replied. The Vigilant Dawn's mission was to patrol the outer colonies and monitor the scattered human settlements that had sprung up since the war. Despite their defeat, humans continued to spread throughout contested space, establishing small communities on worlds that other species ignored. These colonies operated under Valerian authority, but maintained their distinctly human character. They grew earth crops in alien soil, built familiar-looking houses under foreign stars, and raised their children to remember a homeworld many of them had never seen. During his first month on patrol, Zekthorus visited 12 human settlements. Each one surprised him. He had expected to find broken people struggling to survive. Instead, he found communities that were thriving despite their difficult circumstances. The farming world of New Dakota was his third stop. The planet was harsh, with long winters and soil that required constant treatment to support earth crops. The human colonists had been there for 8 months, building their settlement from nothing. Mayor Susan Rivers met him at the landing pad. She was a former Earth Marine who had traded her combat uniform for farming clothes. Her hands were stained with soil, and her face was tanned from working under the alien sun. "Welcome to New Dakota, Commander," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "Would you like a tour of our settlement?" As they walked through the growing town, Rivers introduced him to the colonists. There was Pete Morgan, a former Navy engineer who now designed irrigation systems for the alien flora. Dr. Karen White had been a battlefield medic during the war and now ran the colony's small hospital. What struck Zekthorus was their complete lack of self-pity. These humans had lost everything in the war: their homeworlds, their military, their independence. Yet they seemed genuinely happy with their new lives. "How do you do it?" he asked Rivers as they stood in a field of earth wheat growing under the orange light of an alien star. "Do what?" Stay hopeful. You lost the war. Your people are scattered across the galaxy. Your home is gone. How do you keep building? Rivers was quiet for a moment, running her fingers through the grain stalks. You want to know the real difference between humans and Valerians? She asked finally. Yes. You fight wars to win. We fight wars to survive. And sometimes surviving looks a lot like losing. She led him to a small memorial at the center of town. It was a simple stone marker with names carved into its surface. Colonists who had died during the settlement's early months. Some had been killed in accidents, others by disease, a few by the harsh climate. Every name here represents someone who didn't give up, Rivers said. They died trying to build something better for their children. That's not defeat. That's victory. Over the following months, Zekathoris visited dozens of human settlements. Each one taught him something new about resilience and hope. On the mining world of Second Chance, former soldiers worked alongside former enemies to extract rare minerals. The Valerian overseers spoke of their human workers with grudging respect. On the research station orbiting Proxima 7, human and Valerian scientists worked together to study the planet's unique ecosystem. Dr. Torres, whom he had met during the diplomatic negotiations, was leading a joint research team that included both species. We're making real progress, she told him during his inspection visit. The Valerian crystal technology combined with human adaptability is producing amazing results. We've already developed 3 new medical treatments. The cooperation was not always easy. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, and moments of tension between the two species. But gradually, humans and Valerians were learning to work together. On the trade station at Beta Centauri, Zekathoris met Captain Frank Kim again. The former prisoner of war now commanded a civilian transport ship, carrying goods between human settlements and Valerian worlds. Business is good, Kim said as they shared a meal in the station's common area. Turns out humans make things that Valerians want and Valerians make things that humans need. Who would have thought? Do you ever regret not continuing the fight? Zekathoris asked. Kim considered the question seriously. Every war ends eventually, he said. The smart thing is to make sure something good comes from the ending. As his patrol duty continued, Zekathoris began to understand what the humans had accomplished. They had turned defeat into opportunity, occupation into partnership, and loss into hope for a better future. He started writing reports about what he saw, documenting the success of human-Valerian cooperation. But each time he tried to file the reports, he hesitated. Would High Command understand? Would they see the value in what these scattered colonies were building? Finally, he wrote a different kind of report. It was classified, marked for his personal files only. In it, he admitted the truth about the war and its aftermath. The Valerian Republic did not defeat humanity, he wrote. We simply outlasted them. The real victory belongs to the humans who have turned their conquerors into unwilling students of courage, resilience, and hope. He sealed the report in his private files, knowing it would never be read by anyone else. But writing it gave him a sense of peace he had not felt since the war ended. The final entry described his decision to request permanent assignment to the Frontier Patrol. He wanted to spend his remaining years overseeing human resettlement efforts, helping those who had taught him what it really meant to be a warrior. True strength is not measured in victories won, he concluded, but in the grace with which one faces the impossible and finds a way to keep fighting, keep hoping, keep being human. 6 months later, Zekathoris was promoted to Frontier Patrol Administrator, responsible for coordinating relations between Valerian authorities and human settlements throughout the outer colonies. It was not the career path he had planned, but it felt right. On his final inspection tour before taking the new position, he returned to New Dakota. The settlement had grown into a proper town with schools, workshops, and even a small spaceport. Mayor Rivers met him at the landing pad, just as she had a year earlier. You look different, Commander, she said. More at peace. I learned something. From your people, he replied. What's that? that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to help the living build something worth fighting for. Rivers smiled and led him toward the town center where a celebration was beginning. Human and Valerian families gathered together, sharing food and stories under the alien stars. Children of both species played together, learning each other's languages and customs. Zekthorus watched the scene and realized that this was what victory really looked like. Not parades or medals or monuments to the fallen, but people of different worlds choosing to build a future together. The ghosts of human Frontlines would follow him forever, but they no longer felt like a burden. They felt like guides, showing him the path toward something better than war. In serving his former enemies, he had found a kind of peace, and perhaps in time, both species would learn that the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the courage to hope for something better.